Hello and welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow, India's largest platform for entrepreneurs. Anything and everything that concerns you and matters to you, we've got it covered right here on the show. I'm Sananda Jaiseelan. Today on LOT Icons, we have two very special guests. First up, a previous conversation that I've done with Naina Lal Kidwai. We're bringing you part two of that. I'm also on LOT Icons, welcoming in on the show Sumant Sinha. Your advice on how small businesses and entrepreneurs should find that right mentor for your business, and more so if you're a woman entrepreneur, what would you like to tell them?
So, Sunanda, I didn't have the advantage of a mentor, but I think one
Okay.
picks up mentors as one goes along, depending on what one needs. And people are really surprisingly helpful, surprisingly forthcoming in terms of providing that support. So I would just say that if you are an entrepreneur running a business and you're at a stage when you're looking for, let's say, startup funding, the ideal would be to find a mentor in, say, angel networks that
Okay.
exist, which can guide you in exactly what you need, as against a generic, someone who just feels good
Sure.
for you, but may not actually be a sector expert. So I would say seek a mentor for that specific space that you need support and help in.
I want to talk about philanthropy and CSR and giving back, really. And I do know that's something that's very close to your heart. So maybe, my first question to you on that is, why is it so important? I do know that you do a lot of work, including with your husband. Why is it important to you?
So I think one cannot live in our country and not be
Hmm.
touched by everything around us.
Okay.
There are always people who need support and help in every possible way. And the way we give can be in so many small ways. Uh, give of
Hmm.
one's time. So very early, we worked when actually, when I was with the bank, with HSBC, with microfinance companies that were lending money through self-help groups. And we as an organization were also lending to them, but it was very clear that they had issues they were raising with us. They wanted to scale up. They didn't know how. So we had many of our HR officers work in fact, in their free time. We gave them just a couple of days a year on bank time, but otherwise it was their weekends, their time, and they did it happily to provide the
Okay.
support to these organizations so they could understand how to organize themselves better. Uh, we had organizations we were supporting, and whenever I always asked, please check with them what it is they need other than money. And there was a need to get finance support. There was sometimes
Okay.
need to just have people come in and help, teach kids as was the case with the mobile creche, which really teaches construction workers kids. So depending on what the support was, one was able to advertise it in our corporate system so that people would come forward and do what suited them best. Some liked to be at the end of instructing young children. Others wanted to contribute through their finance and HR.
Sure.
So we were able to create such champions. The bank was quite deeply engaged. And what we did was create climate champions. We call them climate champions because initially it was around a climate change program. It was as much to educate our workforce as to have people give their time. And we had people that were going out into the fields, helping monitor biodiversity, vegetation, understanding, bringing those learnings back. We gave them awards, we feted them, they came up on stage and got to tell their stories. So really to celebrate what we were doing as an organization, not just with the CSR department writing out checks, but to really bring it into the DNA of the organization.
Sure.
And from all of that, I benefited, I learned, And it's given me an opportunity to work in these spaces, environment, water, sanitation, and to some extent in the areas of women empowerment, only because of what I learned from others.
Why is it important, in your opinion, then, for entrepreneurs to actively look at giving back to society? We heard from Azim Premji just a few days ago, where he said CSR is not something that should be, put into, carved into stone. Really, can't be something that's mandated. It has to come really from the heart of the company. What's your take on that? What should an entrepreneur's approach to CSR, to giving back to philanthropy be?
Well, Azim is in a whole different space to give
Yeah.
away his wealth in the sort of percentages as indeed Bill Gates and others of that ilk have given is just truly remarkable. And I know he comes from a family where, his mother equally was a great philanthropist. I wish we had more like him. And we have a few who have absolutely done the same. I think everyone finds their own balance. To the extent that, I totally agree with Azim that it isn't just about CSR. Ideally, it should be in the DNA of the individual to do it, but also in the DNA of the organization. The advantage of CSR is that it is making companies reflect on how they can work with the communities around them. And I think that becomes a very useful way to at least get an organization to begin to think about it.
Okay. My last two questions then. Any specific sectors that you think are going to start booming now in 2021? If you had an outlook that you would like to leave us with for 2021, whether it is about new skills that are going to be required for entrepreneurs, whether it's sectors that you think are going to become exciting and interesting, what would those be?
I think some of it is already evident. We have long seen the IT sector and IT-enabled areas to boom, and we're seeing this through fintech. We're seeing this through much of the application that is happening through technology. I think anything that helps in the digital space is clearly in favor right now and will remain, because we've all generations now discovered the beauty of being able to, whether it's shop and e-commerce therein, whether it's logistics, or the advantages we can have by not just having our traditional shopping experience. So delivery of services, delivery of goods through e-commerce, through the digital environment, I think are here to stay. And anything that facilitates and enables that is on a growth path. I do hope that we will see e-commerce flourish in the country. I think we are still struggling to find the balance in terms of what is required therein. E-commerce can help the Kirana merchant as much as it helps me as an individual buyer. So we can help our entire experience of the way the retail shop in the area in which I live is stocked, and the way he is able to serve me right down to the vegetable vendor. If we can help with this whole ability of using that mobile phone in a way where, without being educated by a pictorial representation, possibly by a simple push of a button, people can learn. And I give this example because I was part of I won't call it an experiment anymore, but when it was with self-help groups in Maharashtra, where we called it a manager's school. And it was basically women who were really not educated at all, who came in to understand and learn livelihoods and simple tricks of how you could be a successful vegetable vendor in terms of understanding basic finance and using your mobile phone to check the prices in neighboring mandis. Enabled a vegetable vendor to not just vend her vegetables, but she began to hire 15 and 20 people to make a network who did this. So by giving very simple skills to what appear to be very simple people, in fact, yields huge dividends if we can get this right.
Ma'am, my last question to you. The overarching theme that we have here on Leaders of Tomorrow is empowering a billion dreams. Do you think perhaps the 2021, to a large extent, is going to see, resurgence of dreams? Do you think the worst really of 2020 is behind us?
I would love to believe it is. I think we all have to continue to be very cautious as citizens and keep those masks on. So, if we can keep COVID away, and I really do hope and maybe even believe we can, I do believe that every one of our dreams can be answered, but it's going to be critical for the economy to continue the bounce back it has started. And I think it's up to every one of us as citizens. Uh, some sectors clearly are more impaired than others. I think tourism is one which will benefit from domestic tourism. It's very heartening to see domestic tourism pick up. And I think it's fabulous that young people are beginning to rediscover our country and not feel like they have to keep rushing off to Thailand or elsewhere abroad. And maybe in that sense, it'll be good for us. But restaurants, tourism, hospitality, some of these areas are taking a little more time to rebound, but others have, of course, managed quite well. And we have seen new sectors, as I mentioned, the strength of digital e-commerce, etc., creating its own opportunities. I'm really quite struck by how many women who were maybe providing bread to hotels have now become large providers to domestic retail sales and are in fact therefore not dependent on any one buyer anymore. Maybe they would never have tried this if they weren't forced to, but because they were forced to, they have pivoted really well through the digital makeup and moved. We've seen firms like Wingreens, which have really diversified across states. Again, these are women entrepreneurs who have used this last year, what could have been a very troubling year through COVID, to grow and to pivot to a new paradigm and have done it really well. So I think we have to just keep looking for opportunities, not throw up our hands in despair, and find those solutions. And in some cases, maybe give up the old to really move with the new, because this is a new normal.
Fantastic. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you here. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to take a quick break. On the other side, Sumant Sinha of Renew Power joining us to talk about renewable energy and talk about what the way forward is looking like when it comes to clean energy in 2021. Do stay tuned. Back in just a moment. Welcome back. With us here on Leaders of Tomorrow, and tonight our second guest on LOT Icons is Sumant Sinha. Sumant, good having you here on the show. I want to get a sense of 2020, what that meant for you personally, professionally, so many changes taking place around us, and how you were able to really navigate all of those changes and, how you really responded to all the things that were happening as a business leader, as an individual. Give us some of those highlights.
So the first and most important issue that we've had to deal with is basically to make sure that our employees are safe and secure and healthy during this time period. And that's the thing that we focused on most. While we've done that, of course, we've also had to focus on the health of our business, which is as critical because we have a number of stakeholders. And so we've tried to do that. So I think we've gone through different phases. In the first couple of months when everybody was under a strict lockdown, the issue really was trying to just understand the nature of the pandemic and just make sure that we were able to keep operating all of our assets, in very inhospitable circumstances when it was hard to just get to the sites. But I think there the government has helped a lot in defining power as an essential service and allowing us to continue operating all of our assets. After the first phase of the first 2-3 months sort of was behind us, then I think it became much more about now how do we get into a steady state situation and how do we really start looking at our business and settle into working from home. And one of my personal learnings was that I had never really done this virtual working and working from home and so on. And frankly,
Yeah.
my experience was that it wasn't so bad. It was quite effective. I realized one didn't have to necessarily be physically in the same place. I think all of our employees and I also, we all got used to being on Zoom calls or Microsoft Teams calls, and that became pretty effective. And in some ways, it was actually also not a bad thing because you realize that you could actually interact with a lot more people at the same time. People who are not physically also in your city, you could interact with them without too many issues. And
Sure.
obviously, conferences and the touchy-feely aspect of running a business or managing people, that of course went away. But I thought with extra effort and extra interactions, you could compensate for that to some extent. Um,
Sure.
so I think it's been a very interesting time. There's been a lot of learning from this, and I think certainly that there are going to be some fundamental changes that will happen in how we approach our work and how we think about the work environment into the future. But as far as our business is concerned, I must tell you that we've come through reasonably unscathed. Our business is doing well. Our revenues have been fine, and growth has continued to be pretty good.
Are you happy with the support that the sector has seen from the government?
I would say that in our sector, particularly, the government has been rather responsive. Right in the
Okay.
beginning when the pandemic started off, the government allowed, as I said, for renewable energy projects to carry on evacuating power and supplying power into the grid at full capacity. So even though there was a reduction in power demand, it did not impact the renewable energy sector. So that was positive. Secondly, the government, as I said, gave extensions on project execution deadlines.
Yeah.
They gave moratorium to the banks, so that is also good for our cash flows. And as part of the
Okay.
fiscal stimulus package, they also gave a 120,000 crore package to the distribution companies to inject liquidity
Yeah.
into the system. So I would say, all in all, the government has done a fairly good job in our sector. And in
Okay.
addition to that, they've continued to come out with new bids and new auctions for allocating new capacity. So I have no complaints from all of our stakeholders. Of course, we've had to have various conversations with the government to try to make sure that some of the things that they were discussing or thinking about were a little bit tweaked here and there. But I think for the most part, the government in our sector at least has got it right. Our
Sure.
sector certainly is one that is going to continue to add a lot of jobs in the future. Our sector is going to grow very, very substantially over the next 5 to 10 years and even beyond. And you should assume that within infrastructure, which as you know is a huge part of the economy, renewable energy is going to become a very, very central part. And there is going to be a lot of investments that will happen and a tremendous amount of job creation also that will happen in our sector. And therefore, that will result in manufacturing jobs, component supplying jobs, project development jobs, asset management jobs, so a
Sure.
whole number of jobs across different areas. So I think it's going to be quite positive from that standpoint.
So, the one thing perhaps, many things that the pandemic has taught us, but the one thing that it has taught us is that, the role of digital when it comes to our everyday lives and the role of digitization really in our everyday lives. Just walk us through what digitization and digital has meant for someone who's in the clean energy space and how businesses really responding to adopting more technology and digital in their businesses.
I think it will because, for example, simple things like traveling, right? Now, I haven't been
Hmm.
on a plane for the longest time. And I think the need to physically be somewhere, that need has diminished. And that, I think, therefore, will increase everybody's efficiency and productivity to a reasonable extent. Uh, the
Sure.
other person who you had to go and meet for whatever reason, they don't expect you to show up now. So I think that's the big change that has happened. Of course, during COVID times, they don't want you even to be showing up. But I think even once COVID is gone, they'll appreciate, that it doesn't mean that you have to be sitting in front of them. So I think that's one very
Sure.
important aspect of this whole work from home and working at distance that will happen. How we able to improve the quality of our execution, how we able to improve the quality of operating our assets. I think all of that are areas where digitization is going to be playing a very massive role, is already doing so, but is going to, I think, lead to a point where you will have very significant increases in efficiency gains on account of increasing
Sure.
digitization. So I think companies that adopt digital strategies will really benefit, and those that don't will, I think, begin to fall back.
I want to talk about fossil free, your new book. What highlights can you give us from there?
Yeah, sure. That's a topic close to my heart. So, the reason I wrote that book is because we are living through an age of a massive energy transition of the kind that has happened maybe twice in humanity's history. When we first moved into coal in the 18th, 19th centuries, and then in the 20th, early 20th century as we moved into oil. And we have a similar transition taking place. So, we're now moving from fossil fuels. And so, therefore, both oil and coal into really the era of clean energy. And this is something that is less well understood, and the reason is that you know it's happening around us, and when things are happening around you, even if they're happening very rapidly, it's hard to actually find, analyze that and understand that on a day by day basis. The second thing is
Okay.
that there's also this massive imperative of climate change, right? We all know that we suffer from all sorts of environmental issues. The world is getting warmer every year on year on year. Every year is warmer than the previous year. We're looking at least 3 degrees centigrade temperature increase by the end of the century. And all experts have told us that anything more than 1.5 to 2 degrees is going to be calamitous for the world at large. So we're not on the right track from a climate change standpoint. And therefore, renewable energy, which offers really a tremendous amount of hope because it is now commercially viable. And so, therefore, the whole issue is that the market based requirement and the climate change requirement are both coming together right now. And therefore, as you envision the future of the energy sector, it's going to be vastly different from what has come so far.
Okay. My last question then is advice for entrepreneurs. What would you like to leave our viewers with?
Okay. So, my advice to entrepreneurs is that you have to be very resilient. More than anything else, of course, you have to be commonsensical. Of course, you have to be ambitious. Of course, you have to have risk-taking ability. But, as you get through the initial phase of survival and get your funding and so on, as an entrepreneur, there are so many things that hit you from all sides constantly that you really have to have a very high degree of inner strength and conviction in what you're doing. And whenever you get knocked down, you need to have the strength and the ability to pick yourself up and keep going. And take the example of the pandemic. It's just totally random, totally new, totally different, total black swan event. Who could have anticipated it, right? And so, but our entrepreneurs have to keep going, and there's nobody else that they can rely on other than themselves and perhaps their families. Um, and so, therefore, you need to have this high degree of resilience to keep going. So, I think that's the message I would leave for entrepreneurs.
Sumant Sinha, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Sananda.
Completely out of time in this episode of Leaders of Tomorrow. If you have any feedback for us, our contact details is up on your screens as we speak. Thanks for watching. Have a good time.